Hey, Annie, how's it going?
Good, good. It looks very Chicago in your background. You even got the exposed brick wall and everything.
Yes, it's very Chicago here.
All right, I'll let you take it away. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. All right, Bavo, can you give me a yes when you see my slide?
Yes.
Awesome, it's perfect. All right, so first off, let me introduce myself a little bit. As Annie said, I'm Simon. I'm a product designer here at Doc Studio. I'm Belgian. I used to study at the Vine, so I'm an alumni there. And now I work here in the Chicago office of Doc Studio. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the history of Doc Studio, not only the history, but how we try to push the digital landscape throughout our 10 years and plus of history. So without further ado, let me tell you a little bit more about us as a company first. So here's what we try to do, right? So we try to craft brands, digital products, and experiences that feel amazing. Now we try to put an emphasis on feel amazing because if we put it in short, what we want to do is leave a mark on the digital landscape. Now that sounds super vague, but later on you're going to notice hopefully how we try to steer away from that digital sameness and really try to lay our own path and try to be that special studio out there that makes incredible immersive work. So over the years, we were fortunate enough to open multiple studios around the world, Chicago being the one that I'm in currently. Our headquarters are still in Namur. For the ones who don't know where Namur is, it's a really small town, village better, in the French side of Belgium. We also have an office in Mexico, and recently, actually a couple of months during COVID, we opened our latest office in Amsterdam. So we work worldwide, which also gives us the opportunity to work with some really nice clients, some of the most talented people around, for the likes of Zoox, Time Magazine, Google, and so forth. Working with cool clients and being a bit around the world, it gave us an opportunity to collect some awards over the years, which is always nice to have. But actually, when we make work, there's one thing we always start with. There's one obsession that we have, and that's this question. So what if function and emotion had a baby? Now, this is something that we always ask ourselves when we try to make a product for this reason. If we look at our brain, we have two sides. So the left side is focused on creativity, and the right side is more focused on form and function. Does it work well? If you put that to a product, does it load fast enough? Does the UX make sense? So we know when we create a product that positive emotions are going to influence memory creation, right? But it also has to make sense, and like I said, load good. The UX has to make sense. So the real challenge is actually to please both sides of those brains. We have to create some sort of memory, some sort of feeling with the user, but it also has to be pleasant to go through the whole experience. Now, let's go back a little bit in history, right? If we look back 20 years, start of the internet, there was Flash. A lot of people still love Flash and miss what Flash was. But basically, that was, if you look back at that time, that was the answer on the first part of that question. Those websites were really focused on the left side of our brain, trying to create that experience, trying to really portray the wildest ideas online. We could add textures, we could add the most craziest experience. It was really, well, you could do everything. But then came Apple, and they came out with the iPad, if I'm right. And with the launch of the iPad came also a statement saying, okay, we don't use Flash anymore. It doesn't work for us for multiple reasons. And we kind of fell into this abyss, right? There was a lot of exploration on the web. It was a free-for-all. There were a lot of cool ideas. Okay, maybe UX wasn't perfect, but at least every website had its own unique character. And if you went on the website, good or bad, you always had a feeling when you went on those. Going further in the time to now, we kind of have the feeling that everything on the web lost its character. If we go to Dribble, Behance, and whatnot, and we look for a website, you're quickly going to see stuff like this, which is basically all the same elements, and it all blends into each other in one big mess, for lack of a better words. So you start to get that digital sameness. And when looking for or wanting to create a website with some character and a unique branding and a unique look and feel, it's actually hard to get the right inspiration. Because when you look on the platforms that are supposed to give you inspiration, you're going to have stuff like this, seeing actually websites or products that all look the same and all use the same inspiration. If we go to branding, it's the same thing. I think actually on this one, Chobani was the first with this sort of DIY look and feel, which as when you do it as a brand for the first time, it's really cool, but it starts to lose its value also quickly when you see that other people just take it over. Same for this website, right? I think we've all seen this one, the nice parallax where the landscape goes over the title as you scroll down. This is a really immersive experience at first. But then again, it's also been done 100 times over. So when we look at those platforms, when we try to build our own products, we kind of end up with this feeling like, okay, we love Behance, Dribble, and whatnot for the inspiration, for the interactions, and to see what our possibilities are. But we also kind of hate it because we see a lot of the same things. And what can we do to bring some uniqueness, some character back to the web, go back to that feeling of 20 years ago, where we could actually take some risks to make sure that the user has that immersive feeling. I mean, I think this is the best example. It's the most unusable UI ever built in the world, but still it's famous. So when you're starting out as a young designer, you tend to feel like, okay, this is the route I should go when looking at inspiration. Because, I mean, 15K people can be wrong, right? Well, they can be, but then how do we attack that? How do we go away from that digital sameness? How do we make our own path and try to be unique? Well, we love this quote. If you're always going to try to be normal, you never know how amazing you can be. It's the same when looking at platforms like Dribble or Behance. If you keep looking at those, you're never going to see what is outside of the world. Maybe you can take inspiration from nature and whatnot, but more on that later. So what we noticed is that on one hand, you have your strategy, and your UX and whatnot, which, I mean, it needs to be super solid, or else you're creating a crappy product as nice and as immersive as it could be. But there's a couple of things that we noticed that you can do to bring back that personality to the web. And those are the following. So we can work with tone of voice, interactions, content, storytelling, sound design, and even if it's a corporate website, just thinking about, okay, how we can change the structure. So then you can scratch off tone of voice because it's probably going to be more corporate. Storytelling is probably also going to be less, but there's always ways where you can add that personality. And that's something as Doc Studio we really strive for. So we came up with this. We came up with something called the money idea. Now the money idea is basically a different, if that's a word, from the money shot in cinema. So what is a money shot? That is the one shot that is going to stick in your mind and that you're going to remember. If we turn that to the web or to a product, it's the provocative and bold idea that is going to make sure that your website is remembered, and a user might not remember the whole website, but they're going to really remember that UI, they're going to remember the structure or whatever the money idea was of that website. So now I'm going to go over some of our projects, tell you a little bit more on how to try to create a unique product, how we came up with the money idea, and again, how we try to go away from that digital sameness. So let's start with our own website. When we hear people talk, it's often referred as the one with the animated 3D dog looking a bit like a wolf. Now, that's the perfect example of a money idea, right? Maybe, I mean, users have a lot of stuff going on in their lives, but if they remember your money idea, then it means that you've done something good. So this is generally how we start our project, with sketches. We feel that in order to go away from the clutter that is sometimes Behance, or Dribble for a matter of fact, we have to start with sketches, because we feel like if we go away from our tools, from typography, colors, and whatnot, you actually start to be, it's just your mind and a piece of paper, so you can go as wild as you want, because I mean, there's no rules or anything. You can just sketch, and there's no developer that's going to tell you, okay, that's not possible because of this restriction and this restriction. So this is what we do first. We try to get our first concept out. It's also going to make sure that you don't stick with that one top of mind idea you have in the beginning, which is something when you work in a design tool, you're going to try to explore that top of mind idea. You're going to start adding color to see if it works or not. When you sketch it on paper, you're quickly going to notice, okay, this might not be a good idea. On the other hand, the sketch is also really handy because, okay, you can use your imagination, but you still have to go in conversation with your developer as well. As studios, we still have our budgets, we have our scopes and whatnot. So having it on a piece of paper, not having wasted too much time, you can immediately string up that conversation with your developer and see, okay, for our one website, if you want a floating dock on top of the content in WebGeo, is it going to work? Is it going to fit in our scope? If not, what can we do with it? Then another tip is try to steer away from what you see online. If you want to create a feeling with human beings, because in the end, that's what we're dealing with, try to look at art, try to look at nature, because that's what humans really have a connection with, not the online world. I think that is something that we really noticed during COVID. We really needed that connection, that outside world, even just contact between humans. So what we try to do for our own website is try to look at paintings, at art. Now, we had a lot of inspiration from Rembrandt, not because of the painting style, because there was a real expressive lightning. The animals that you see were really over the top, and you could see some sort of emotion on their faces, right? They weren't just animals. It almost felt like characterization of a human being. So it really told a story in a really small frame. So we started on our dock. We built 3D dock on our website in WebGeo. We, of course, started first with a 3D model of it, all based off the sketches we did at first. Then the next thing we do is try to design as much as possible in the browser itself. So what I mean by that is that once our 3D artist creates the model, we implement it in WebGeo, and we try to create an interface around it. So that means, as a designer, you not just hand off your design to developer and then see what the outcome is. It's always a full conversation. So that means we get the staging link, we can just adjust some sliders, and then show it to developer, give them the values, and be like, okay, we want the blur to be like this, we want the body to be this color, this shade, and whatnot. So it's really important to have that conversation. That is basically the same principle as the sketches, right? It's going to make sure that the vision you had in the beginning stays alive throughout the whole project. Because even though some things might not be possible, you're going to get a direct input from your developer saying, okay, maybe we shouldn't do it in 3D. Maybe it should just be a PNG. So then this was the outcome. And if you compare it to the sketches I showed you in the beginning, the concept is still alive. It's exactly the same idea that we had in the beginning. This is some more examples of some other pages. So you can see here that we really try to push those details, right? Okay, what can we do to make sure that we're different than any other agency website in this case? We can create a setting with having some leaves around the dog. There's also sound design on our website. So if you go, you hear nature sounds. So that means you're going to get fully immersed. The whole structure is more of a poster structure rather than a real website template structure. So again, starting with sketches, looking at inspiration from art from the outside world is going to make sure that you're not fit or stuck in the pattern of, oh, what has the last designer done on a really famous product. I'm going to skip some slides because there's a lot of videos, and the platform doesn't really handle videos that well. So we're going to move on to the next example of a project and a money idea of ours. So, of course, the last example I showed you was our own agency website. And it's always easier to go a bit more experimental because you're your own client. So nobody is going to say no to you. There's also not really a budget, so you can go a little wild. So this one is the one with the interactive flying red Visa card. And this one was for a bank called Rappi. Well, Rappi is more than a bank. They're called a super app. It's a Latin American unicorn, so they're valued at $1 billion. And if we talk about banks, we often hear statistics, right? Now, we can make websites and put a shitload of statistics on there, but that's not going to create a connection with humans. We, as I said in the beginning, we're still handling human beings, so we have to keep that in mind. If we make a product, it has to tell some sort of story. So this is the eventual app that we also made for them, for Rappi Pay. But more important is when they launched the card, which is handled in the app. It's sort of like an Apple Pay you can compare it with. So in the beginning, they asked us, okay, we're launching this new product. It's going to be our first online bank, one of the first online banks and cards in Latin America. Can you help us with a one-pager that is going to explain our story? So we started out again with a sketch. I think I don't have to remind you of the benefits of going for a sketch, but again, you're going to see once I show you the final result that this sketch is really, really close to the final version. So again, in order to have that unique end result, really try to sketch out like for an hour, 2 hours to get all the top of mind ideas out of your head. And get that one unique idea that's going to make sure that your website stands out, or just your product in general. Of course, we still do wireframes as a product design company. So as you can see here, based on the sketch we did, create a rough wireframe. You can see here the concept. So the concept was the credit card, because okay, if we look at banks, if we look at our own wallet, either it's online or offline, what is the hero in that story? We want to tell a story, but we need a hero. We need something to base the story around. What is that going to be? Well, in this case, it's going to be a Visa card. So what we wanted to do is to tell the story, tell the benefits of the Visa card while having the card following you around across the page. It's quite similar to what we did on our own website, but of course, a bit more corporate. And then if you see the whole transition from our sketches to the eventual result, again, you can see that it's really similar, and the concept and the beginning of the idea, the vision better, is still alive at the end of the version of the eventual version, right? So that's really important. This was the final version. Again, I don't know how good it handles videos, but so you can see the card follows you around, the story is being told, and you hardly see numbers. So we weren't bombarding you with numbers, financial stuff. We were just telling a story while the Visa card is following you around. And if you wanted to sign up, you could do it at the end of the page. So really simple, but you're still telling a story. You're creating a unique art direction based on, in this case, the branding of the company. But the vision of the sketches, the unique idea was still alive from start to finish. Okay, then moving on to the next example is the one with the snowy iceberg for a festival. So each year we organize a festival, which is called the Kick Festival. Last year we had to cancel it, of course, due to COVID. But each year we have the opportunity to create a new branding from scratch. So the Kick team comes with us with a subject, and then it's on to us to create a whole vision around it. And last year, 2 years ago better, they came with this one. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because it's impossible. But we weren't really sure what it meant. Oral all we kind of knew was that we wanted to talk about the fragility of nature, right? Going back to that inspiration I showed you on our own website. If you work with nature elements, it's really going to help you because that's going to create an automatic connection with human beings. So we're going back to what we know best. For inspiration, and it's something I didn't mention yet, we often, again, try to steer away from Dribble or Behance, something that I've mentioned 10 times probably. We try to go to things like Pinterest. It's going to give you a quick collection of things that might be relevant to you, but it's also going to give you the opportunity to put in a lot of keywords. And the UI of Pinterest is kind of the same as your brain works, right? You put in one keyword and your brain thinks of another keyword. You can just type and you're going to get really cool results that are going to be away from really top of mind ideas or stuff that is done already on the web. So when we were talking about the subject that we had this year for Kik, we quickly looked at nature elements, cartography and whatnot. We always start with the poster because that is going to define our eventual web experience. And what we noticed is that, okay, we can crumble some paper to make it look like a mountain, but that's not going to make sure that you actually feel as a human being that you're looking at a mountain. It's still going to feel like a piece of paper at the end. So then once we added those elements of a map, in this case, those little lines, you immediately feel that connection. Oh, I'm looking at a top view of a map. So again, I'm just going to keep repeating it, adding those elements or inspiration from nature and the real life world is going to make sure that you create a connection with human beings. You're going to string up some sort of emotion. Sorry, I'm losing my voice here. So in the end, this is a screen from the eventual website. You can see here the concept of the iceberg that was pretty much a crumbled piece of paper is still alive. Then we added some elements of cartography on top of it, and also little elements, right? As I said in the beginning, if you add animations, some interactions, it's really going to start coming alive, and you're going to go closer and closer to the character that you want your website to be. So for example here, okay, we have a mountain in the middle. What if we hover over the text here, the title, and it moves away on hover as if you would be wiping away snow. So to wrap this one up, if you add more and more elements to your art direction that fit together and create one ecosystem, you're going to have a stronger result in the end. And again, it's going to make sure that you have a unique website. It's something that you're not going to see on any other inspiration platform because it's uniquely you. It started out from sketches directly from your brain, not from something that you saw online. The elements you saw in nature. So it's not going to be, again, something you saw online. And then you just have to keep iterating to make sure that you have the best possible product that you can make. I'm going to skip the videos here, sorry, because I'm also a bit ahead of time. So I'm going to go into the last project, which is the one that kind of looks like an episode of Lost. And this was our biggest one yet. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about the project that we did for Tomorrowland. I'm going to go really fast through this one. But you guys know Corona happened, festivals had to cancel their events, and they were basically put up with one choice, right? Do we want to cancel our event, or do we want to do it, but fully online? And if so, how do you want to translate that experience that you have online, the feeling of meeting people, the feeling of having a drink while listening to music? How can we translate that online? Which was a bit hard, because not a lot of brands had experience with it. I mean, honestly, nobody had any experience with it. And the first one that really did it right was Fortnite with their collaboration with Travis Scott. And starting from that, there were a lot of brands that were like, okay, we can do this. There is an opportunity to create something really unique here. So Tomorrowland came to us with the question to, okay, can you make our event online on an island in the shape of the Tomorrowland logo? So what we did is, in this case, we were working with a really big team of 3D artists, developers, designers, art directors, and whatnot. And we were fortunate enough to skip the sketches. So we asked the designers or the 3D artists better to, okay, give us a mock-up of the island, and we're just going to Photoshop it. we're going to put some colors on it, and we use that as a reference. So this is basically our sketches that we normally do, but in a more higher fidelity package, right? So this was going to be our reference that we were going to use throughout the whole platform to make sure, again, that our vision that we have from the beginning stays true in the middle, in the end, and whenever stuff gets hard, because I mean, projects don't go perfect, right? We also had a night version because we wanted to replicate the feeling you had at a real festival, because of course we all know that most of the festivals, the nicest moments you're going to have in the night, you have the lights, you have the fireworks and whatnot. So we really wanted to replicate that experience as well. So I'm going to take you a little bit to the process. Again, I have to go a little bit quicker because I don't have all the time. So we started out with a 3D model. As I said, we used that as a reference and tried to Photoshop as much as possible on top of it. So development directly had a guide. Okay, this is what we need to do. And again, it enabled us to have that conversation with our developers, to not just hand something off and then see what is going to happen in the end. We made multiple versions, multiple iterations, because we can create an island in the shape of a logo. But if it looks too much like a logo, it's not going to look like an island anymore. So we had to find that balance. We had some 3D assets from the Tomorrowland team. But what we had to make sure is that, and that's going back to the very first slide, right? We can try to attract an emotion from the person that is visiting our product, our website. But if it's not performant, then, well, we're not doing our job. So we had 3D assets from Tomorrowland, but we had to make those, we had to remodel those to make sure that it was performant on web, because that was going to be the ultimate product. Then again, same strategy as we do on almost all our WebGL products. We tried to create an interface in one of the earliest weeks of the project, because that is, again, going to enable us to design as much as possible in the browser itself. And it's going to stir up the talks with development. It's also going to speed up our process, because we don't have to hand off stuff. We're not going to have a question from development. Hey, I want to place birds. Where do I need to place them? Can you design this real quick? No. If we want to place birds, development created a full spline system, as we call it, on the map. So we as designers could just adapt it and place it ourselves. So development doesn't really have to do anything. Same goes for the lighting. Again, this goes back to the example of Kik. The more elements of nature or just outside inspirations you can use, the more immersive it's going to feel, and the more real-like it's going to feel like an experience, right? So adding clouds, adding lights. The clouds in this case were just PNGs, but with placing them nicely on the spline system, you create this immersive feeling as if the island would be actually real. Again, other tactics like, okay, how do we show how many people are on a stage on an online event? Because you don't see the people. It's not the same as a real life event. So created this particle system around stages that is going to be brighter when there's a lot of people, and it's going to be more spread out and lighter in color as less people are on the stage. So again, we had the full possibility due to our development team to change colors, change hues, change also the amount of points that we want to have per person on the stage. So that's really interesting. It's really important if you want to create immersive projects, that you have that collaboration and that level of detail in what you're trying to create. So in this case, we had lampoons with the logo of Tomorrowland. We had flags, we had butterflies, again, in the shape of a Tomorrowland logo. And then this was the eventual outcome, right? So an island with all the stages on top of it. You can click on it, go into the event, and explore it like it would be real life. This was the day version, so we would just switch automatically from day to night based on the location you're at. Some other views. But of course, we wouldn't be a product design company if we didn't make some guidelines along the way, put some UI on top of it. So that is something that we still do as well, right? It's not because we make immersive projects that we forget that form and function of products. Going back to the first slide, we have to pleasure both sides of the brain. It has to make sense. It has to be pixel perfect. Has to be correct. States should make sense of buttons, for example. So we still create guidelines as immersive as we are as a studio. So some other examples. And then when it all comes together, 3D UI, this is what it looked like. So you could just click on the POI, point of interest, have a sidebar with the UI elements, and you could just explore the island as is. Then some other screenshots. So the night mode as well. So you can see we also adapted the UI to do night mode. So in the end, we learn a lot of new skills, which is always good, which is always nice with every project that comes in. But again, we have to go back to where it all started. Okay, how can we be different as a product design studio? How can we make different websites, apps, whatever it is? How can we make those different from what we see normally on Dribbble, Behance? And that is looking back at how we are as human beings, looking at those both sides of the brain. We have to please the left side, which is based on creativity, which is based on emotions. But we have to make sure that we actually please both. It has to make sense. It has to be beautiful. It has to be solid as a product as a whole. It has to create a feeling with the user, because we know that if we create that feeling with the user, they're going to remember us. Whether it's a good feeling, whether it's a bad feeling, they're going to remember our product. A feeling is always better than no feeling, because if you don't strike a feeling with your user, well, then they're just going to go on to the next website. They're going to go on Facebook, Instagram, and they're just going to forget who you are. So I think we just made it in 30 minutes. That was it. And if you have any questions, go ahead. And that was your time.
So both sides of my brain are very pleased.
Yeah, there was a lot talking.
Oh my gosh, that Tomorrowland world, that was amazing. I mean, we've been talking about game design influencing interfaces for a long time, but did you guys have game developers and game designers working on that? It looked like, World of Warcraft to me or something like that.
No, we don't. But that is a good point you strike up, because we actually had a lot of inspirations from those things. As I said, we try to steer away from the usual inspiration and try to look at those things like World of Warcraft, for example.
Yeah, amazing. No, it's really refreshing to get this perspective from the more visual arts side of digital design, because I do think it's a good reminder for us, because as UX designers, rightfully so, we're often kind of skewing in the opposite direction. So trying really hard to make things feel very familiar and accessible to a wide audience. And a lot of times that means creating interfaces that are a lot more plain, that don't, maybe they're less daring when it comes to kind of crazy visuals or sound design or, things like that. And we have a good point in doing that, because, we do have a responsibility to the user to be accessible. But yeah, this makes me realize that there's such a fine balance between that and keeping our design edge, and keeping things really interesting. So I really appreciate the perspective that you brought here tonight.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge, right? Do not mistake the stuff I showed for, don't create only immersive projects.
Sure.
There's still
you just brought up the fancy stuff tonight.
There's still accessibility that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But we also try to push it to the edge of, okay, this is accessible, but what can we do around it? Still make sure it has some sort of character. And that is something that we try to bring in every product that we make. So not every product is going to be a Tomorrowland, but it still is going to have something that's going to make sure that you're going to remember it somehow, some way.
So how do you guard that balance? I'm kind of curious as to the profile makeup of a team that works on something like that. Is it, I feel like in a lot of in some of the examples, it almost looks like there's the profile of like a movie director, you know, in terms of like having that broad creative spectrum of like, I don't know, that the whole experience, not just digital. It seems to transcend. So like, what's a typical team that approaches a project like that?
So we work with, normally on a project, we always have our creative director, which is Henry, which is also the CEO of Doc Studio, better. So we always have him, which kind of guards, okay, if we start a project, he kind of guards that it always has that Doc Studio look and feel. Then we always have a lead designer, and we always have somebody that is in support of that lead designer. Now, what we try to do at Doc Studio is we don't really have levels. So what that means is that, for example, if one of our juniors has an idea or some inspiration that is really relevant, they can just push for it. And if it's really interesting, we'll just go for it. So because we have that open communication and we have that feeling of, okay, we trust in you, you're going to end up with some cooler ideas because we don't guard. We try to go really broad in our discovery process before we start a project better. Because I'm kind of thinking of our discovery process, that could be an interesting one to elaborate a bit more on. What we try to do, we have this time period before every project, which is 2 or 3 days, depending on the budget, where we just go all out. There's no restrictions, there's no nothing. We just have the briefing of the clients and just see as a designer, in conversation, of course, with development, because we still have scope at the end of the day. See how far you can go, just iterate. Those are mostly the hardest days of a project, because you're really pushing yourself to come up with something that has not been done. And then at the end of that, we present it to the client. Then it could be that we have 3-4 different versions of, for example, just a header or some cards or just some UI elements. And then we go on to a conversation with our client. Okay, what do you like? What don't you like? And whatnot. So it's all about conversation and not try to put too much limits on juniors or whatnot. It's really trying to push yourself and see where you can go. And it's also about trust with a client. I mean, not every client wants the same. And we also have products that are not what we want it to be. It just happens.
Fascinating. Well, really, you showed some very inspirational and impressive examples. I think a lot of people in the audience are quite envious of your job at the moment. So thank you for sharing and giving us a bit of a look inside Dog Studio. It looks pretty intense. I don't want to keep us too far over. So I'm going to say thank you for the talk tonight. Thank you to both of our speakers. I think that we had 2 really unique perspectives tonight. One about sort of creating meaningful work environments for people and making lives better that way. And then just this creative visual powerhouse of examples from Dog Studio. So thank you both. What a cool event. If you have additional questions for Simon, he's going to be in a session, so you can join him there. Just find him. His name's on it. Otherwise, enjoy the networking, enjoy the sessions, and we'll see you next month. And thank you to all of our fabulous volunteers who help keep this going every month, especially under lockdown for the past year. I just want to give a big shout out to Bavo, Petra, and Pim in particular for keeping us going. And we'll see you next month. Love you all. Have a great night.